saying that when the economy shifts, when markets waver, and when businesses ask what's next, there's one voice that cuts through the clutter with precision and purpose. Allow me to introduce a man who has become a compass in the chaos, a strategic economic navigator whose insights shape boardroom decisions, national conversations, and everyday headlines. Our speaker doesn't just read the markets, he translates them into strategy. He's none other than Ken Gichinga, the founder and chief economist of Mentoria Economics, a firm that has become synonymous with cutting-edge insights on the global, regional, and Kenyan economies. Before launching Mentoria, Ken made his mark at Equity Bank and Commercial Bank of Africa, now NCBA, where he served as a senior economist, guiding these banking and financial giants through shifting tides. His story goes global with early career experience as a business analyst at Microsoft Corporation in Seattle, USA. A proud graduate of Harvard University, Ken has not only studied the economy, he shapes how we think about it. In 2011, he was named one of Business Daily's inaugural Top 40 Under 40, a recognition of his thought leadership and rising influence. Every Tuesday, he brings economic insights to the airwaves on Capital FM's financial forecasts, where listeners tune in to hear him unpack policy, inflation, growth, and opportunity, not with jargon, but with clarity, confidence, and context. He brings economics out of graphs and spreadsheets and into the real world, helping people and institutions make smart and strategic decisions in the face of uncertainty. So whether you're a policymaker, a business leader, an entrepreneur, or simply ready to rethink what's possible, then get ready for an economist who doesn't just study the future, he helps build it. So please join me as we welcome a storyteller of systems, a translator of trends, a firm believer that economic understanding should empower, not intimidate, a man who goes beyond indicators to implications, and the economist of the people, Mr. Ken Gichinga, speaking to us on the new economic order. Thank you, Ken. Please give him a round of applause. Don't be jealous. Next time I might be reading your bio.
Thank you so much, Stella. Wow, that introduction is so powerful. I was actually telling Stella she's introduced me to myself. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's our great pleasure to be with the TKC community. Once again, many thanks to Coach Irene for your kind invitation, and it's all pleasure. I think this is the second year that I'm able to share my insights with the TKC community, and every time I come, I really make really wonderful friends. So it's a great honor to be here. Today I'll be speaking to you really about the new economic order. The new economic order. It sounds almost prophetic, you know, if you like. And I'll be giving you some points to think about in terms of why this is possibly one of the most significant times in our history. So the theme will be the new economic order. I think the slides should be ready. You've been told I'm Gichinga. I'm the chief economist at Mentoria Economics. Our work really is to advise our partners on matters economics, helping them be able to discover new opportunities as well as mitigate risks. Really, our work is to be independent, and we take pride in our independence. Many times investors, you know, when they come to Kenya, they want to hear the government opinion, they want to hear what the big banks are saying, but they also want to hear an independent voice giving the unvarnished truth. So that's what I'll be delivering today. Cover quite a bit, but I know time is of the essence, so I'll compress it. I'll cover things around economic performance, our fiscal and monetary policy, tax policy, business as well as emerging risks and opportunities that should be significant, particularly with the changing times. Thank you so much. I think the most important thing is I'd like to bring your attention to is an IMF report that came out 2 days ago. And so pretty much the IMF has two big meetings in a year, in April and in October. The April meetings are called the spring meetings, and all the big policymakers right now are in Washington, D.C., including our Kenyans from the Treasury and the Central Bank. They're all now in Washington, D.C. And the issue that I'm very curious, I don't know if I should call it a warning or I would call it an insight, but they say the world is approaching a new economic order. Pretty much the global economic order that we've known since 1945, the last 80 years, has come to an end, and we are about to enter into a whole new economic order. And I thought that was extremely profound. That was, because if you think about it, we've had big events over the last 15 years. We had the 2008 global financial crisis. In 2020, we had COVID, and this was a really testing time. But what the policymakers are telling us is forget about the global financial crisis, forget about COVID. What we are about to begin now is actually a totally new economic order. So I think it's, if there was ever a time to think strategy, if there was ever a time to think hard about the future, what are the new opportunities, what are the risks, the time is now. So I think that was pretty profound, and I think it's a message I'll be repeating over and over. I think when we look back, you'll be like, wow, 2025 was truly the beginning of something different. And what's driving that? Number one, I'll start with what's going on in the United States. Obviously, you had Donald Trump, who won the presidency. Next slide. And last time we spoke, it was before the US elections, and everybody was wondering who will win the American elections. It was first between Biden and Trump, then it became a race between Trump and Kamala Harris, and eventually Trump won it, and very decisively, I must say. All the 7 swing states voted for Trump. So there are those people who had believed Trump 1.0 was a luck, was a fluke. But this now was a confirmation that the Trump administration is here to stay. This was no luck, no fluke. And Trump has come with new policies. He's talked a lot about tariffs. He's talked a lot about the USAID. He's talked a lot about how he sees the place of America in the world. Number one, we saw major cuts in USAID, and USAID is a big player in Kenya. Kenya receives about 81 billion shillings from the USAID every year. And the Trump administration has chosen to, well, they've put a suspension, I think about a 90-day window to review what is useful, what is not. I think there was a feeling among the Republican Party that USAID had become almost like a parallel government of its own, doing its own activities, funding its own activities. There were claims that it was funding LGBTQ activities or other things. So there's very positive use of USAID money, but there's also very negative use of USAID money. So now the administration is using the 3 months to assess what will stay and what will cut. And Kenya depends heavily on USAID. In fact, I keep saying the Kenyan economy has 3 engines. We have the public sector engine, the private sector engine, and the donor funding engine. A lot of the money you see in these areas, the gigiris, the village markets, the the upper class, a lot of that has been USAID money. So it's starting to be felt. It's actually creating a crunch. Even sometimes when I talk to managers of even some of these restaurants, they tell me, hey, we are really starting to feel the cuts. People who used to come 4 times a month now are coming once. So that is actually having an effect. So we pray that the administration, not all the money is cut, that they're able to sort of regularize it, because it's a key part of our economy, even in our healthcare and in terms of that. So that has been the USAID story. Then, of course, there was the issue of tariffs, where Trump had said many countries have been taking advantage of the United States. Many countries such as China, such as Mexico, such as Canada, have been taking advantage of the United States. And he said now he's going to apply tariffs because most of these countries have had a trade deficit. The US has had a trade deficit with those countries. Now, Trump's major advisor on matters trade is a fellow called Peter Navarro. And he wrote a very interesting opinion piece explaining the economics of tariffs, why they have chosen to go with tariffs. And his argument is quite simple. He says the way economics is taught in the classroom is not the way it has been playing out in the global economy. And what did he mean by that? He said, for anybody who's taken even a simple course in economics, they tell you that when you have a trade relationship with a country, let's say, for example, Kenya and China, one country can have a surplus over the other. For example, in Kenya, we import more from China than we export. So we buy more from the Chinese than we export to the Chinese. That means we have a trade deficit. We are a net importer. And economic theory says when you're a net importer, your currency should be weakening over time, because your citizens are demanding foreign exchange to be able to import those goods from abroad. When there's a big demand for foreign exchange, your currency should weaken, and over time, your products should be cheaper, and people should want now to buy goods from you because your goods have become cheaper. So you move from being a net importer to a net exporter. And what Peter Navarro was saying is that is what the classroom teaches you. But the reality is that's not what happens. Many countries have been manipulating the exchange rates. So exchange rates have not been adjusting, and that's why countries have an advantage. Even if you look at the Kenyan exchange rate, and I'll talk about it, it's been at 129 for the last 1 year. It never moved. So they're saying countries are manipulating the exchange rates, so they're maintaining an unfair advantage over the US. And now the US has decided to go with these measures. Thankfully, Kenya was only hit with a 10% tariff. Other countries like Lesotho was hit with about 47% tariffs. Lesotho exports a lot of apparel to the US, things like jeans, clothing. So Lesotho was really hit. And in fact, the Southern African countries were hit very hard. Kenya, it's been 10%, so it's not as big, but it's a time to pause and think about this new economic order that we are moving into. On the European side, and a lot of people, once Trump decided to cut USAID money, a lot of people in the next slide said, you know what, the Europeans will come and save us. The Europeans will come, and where USAID money disappears, Europe will come and fill that void. That really was, a lot of the economists in Kenya were making that argument, but that's actually not true. Actually, Europe is facing its own internal challenges. Europe is actually, in the grand scheme of things, Europe is actually facing the biggest challenges of any region. So they will not be in a place to replace USAID. They're having far too many challenges domestically. Number one, they have not invested in innovation. They have not invested in competitiveness. In fact, out of the top 50 countries top 50 technology companies, only 4 of them are based in Europe. So they have really lagged behind in innovation. They have lagged behind in technology. They have depended on America to cover their security from Russia. And now America is telling them, you have also to pay for your own security. So the money that they would have been putting in international aid programs, they will be actually using to prop up their security budgets, because they need to be spending at least 2 to 3% of their GDP on security. So Europe is not in a place to come and save anybody. It's an aging society. It's lagging behind on many indicators. It's having issues with immigration. So actually Europe is in a very, very tough place, and I would not count on Europe to come and save Africa. Then we move to China. Obviously, our president right now is doing a tour of China. And you remember at the beginning of this administration, the Kenya Kwanza administration was very face west, very pro-America. You remember President Ruto even had a state visit to the United States. Now he is in China on an 8-day state visit. For those who know diplomacy, 8 days is extremely long for a state visit. Normally people go for 2 days, 3 days. So it almost tells you that Kenya is actually shifting towards China. They have signed about 20 agreements. So a lot is being discussed in China, publicly and privately. In fact, there was a time the Treasury had a social media post, and they said part of the discussions will be about debt restructuring. But they quickly deleted that post on social media. And in the world of comms, I'm sure Stella will agree, anytime you delete a post on social media, you actually create more fire than it is. So there's a lot happening right now in China. They're discussing a lot of things, from social, from science and technology to infrastructure. They want money to finish the standard gauge railway, for it to go out further into the interior. They're having collaborations on artificial intelligence. There's a big race between US and China on artificial intelligence, and everybody's debating who will win the AI race, because AI is affecting us. China obviously came up with DeepSeek, which is a response to the America's ChatGPT. And of course, there's a big race. DeepSeek came, and it's faster, it's efficient. But America has also invested heavily on artificial intelligence. In fact, they say America has more data centers than the next 10 countries combined. So they have invested heavily, because this is where the new war will be fought, on technology, on AI, on productivity. And I'm sure some of you are already starting to feel the impact of AI in your own specific fields, and it's going to become more and more. So that's really the big global picture. And now I can talk about Kenya. In terms of Kenya, our macroeconomic outlook, obviously, we always start with inflation. And you can see the inflation number has been at 3.6%. That's a headline inflation number. Obviously, some pockets are still quite high. If you look at some food items like sukuma wiki, tomatoes, they still are facing high levels of inflation, 34%, 29%. But broadly speaking, our inflation is quite low at 3.6%. Now, there is a problem that is not widely understood. And you listen to our leaders, and they'll do a lot of chest thumping, and they'll say, you see, our economy is doing well because inflation is at 3.6%. We are doing well. But what a lot of leaders don't realize is inflation is almost like your body temperature. Your body temperature should be at 37.5 degrees Celsius. If it's too high, if it goes to 40, your doctor will tell you you're having a fever. If it goes too low, also your doctor, if it goes to 35, 34, your doctor will tell you something is wrong with you. And it's the same thing with inflation. Kenya's inflation should ideally be at around 5%. That's actually what has been marked as good inflation. Now, of course, we know the dangers of high inflation. Everybody is aware of, like Nigeria, inflation is 34%, Egypt is very high. So we are very alive to the challenges of high inflation, but we are not very knowledgeable about the problems of low inflation. And low inflation is actually as dangerous as high inflation. And it's actually a sign of very weak demand. When our inflation, at some point it was even at 2% towards the end of December. And it actually points to an economy that is very weak, very anemic, very lethargic, it's very low. And actually it's starting to approach a deflation. A deflation is now when you go into negative. You go 1%, 0, you go into negative. Now once you go into negative, you're in a deflation and prices are actually falling. Prices are actually falling. And Japan is one country that is well aware of the problems of deflation. Japan actually spent 10 years stuck in deflation. And a lot of people ask me, what's the problem with prices falling? Isn't that something we'd want to see? Isn't that something we'd welcome when prices are falling? And I tell them, think of a situation where, for example, you wanted to buy a car. Maybe the car you had in mind is about 2 million shillings. And you had the expectation that that car, it's 2 million shillings today, but in the month of June, it's going to come down to 1.5 million shillings. What will you do? Obviously, you'll wait. And now imagine if everybody is postponing investments. Everybody now starts to wait because they expect prices will start following. Actually, you start getting into a race to the bottom. You start creating, it becomes very destructive because nobody wants to spend today. So there's very little circulation because everybody expects prices will come down and you can go really, really low and you destroy the economy. So that is what Japan faced for 10 years, and it's not something you want to go. So for us, we'd want to be at around 5%. That is really the ideal level. So the number you're seeing really is pointing to a weak economy. Demand is very weak to the point where prices might even start falling. And of course, even in the real estate market, I think we had somebody from the real estate segment, I think it was Victoria. She'll tell you in some areas, you might even find some assets actually starting to fall. So we have to be very careful that the economy is managed. And why is demand very high? It's very low. It's because interest rates have been very high. So in the next slides, you'll see interest rates are finally starting to come down, and you can see how they had been high for a long time. Interest rates have been very high, and these are the things that make weak demand, because somebody who wants to start a business will go to the bank and we look at 17%, 18% and says, you know what, let me just wait, and the economy slows down. So interest rates have been very high. Thankfully, the central bank has tried to be very active. They have been trying to lower interest rates. They have been trying to tell the banks, look, it's time to reduce interest rates. Kenyans are hurting, the economy is hurting. So central bank has been reducing the indicative rates. Unfortunately, the commercial banks are still delaying. They are not passing on those interest rate cuts. So the central bank is passing rate cuts to banks, but banks are very slow to pass it on to you and I and to the businesses. Many of them are saying they are sitting on very expensive deposits, they need time. And in fact, the CBK said we'll start fining banks that are not lowering interest rates. So hopefully you'll start getting SMSs from your banks that some of your loans have actually, the interest rates are coming down. And that becomes a stimulus because it means you have more money in your pocket and you can save more. So the central bank is committed, but banks have been very stubborn, very slow, because that's where they make money. That is how they make money, and you can see how banks made serious profits this year from last year's performance because of high interest rates. So they are very slow, but we really urge them to continue to lower interest rates so that Kenyans can be able to do well. In fact, if you look at the non-performing loans in the economy, they are sitting at 17%. That's actually the highest since almost the Moi days. We've never seen non-performing loans at 17%. Non-performing loans are normally in single digits. So it tells you people can't keep up with payments. The cash liquidity is very tight. So I think now the central bank is really coming out with a stick and telling those banks we need lower interest rates. And why are banks keen on this? Because banks like when government securities are high. That's when they make money. When you get infrastructure bonds, it's easy because it's risk-free to buy an infrastructure bond. You don't have to deal with people defaulting. You don't have to deal with people giving all sorts of excuses. And that's why they like high government securities. And that's what, again, I keep saying, Kibaki tried to do in his time. He said government interest rates on government securities will be very low. It will be at 1%, 2%. People will remember T-bills, bonds used to be at 1%, 2% during the Kibaki days, which means banks could not make any money from T-bills and bonds. And that's why they had to come to you and I, to lend to you and I, so they could make money. But today they can make a lot of money from infrastructure bonds, 17% risk-free. So we try to tell them, let's go back to the Kibaki days, reduce those government interest rates on those government securities to 1%, 2%. And trust me, banks will be coming looking for you. Remember in those Kibaki days, they would come to your office. They would actually tell you, this is my bank, we have these products. When was the last time a banker visited your office? Yes, very few. But they used to camp in a place like Windsor. They know there's a conference. You'd go there, you'd find stands of banks because they needed to lend to you. But now when the securities are very high, so that has been one of what we call the crowding out effect. In the next slide, the exchange rate, again, has been remarkably stable. There's a positive and a negative side to this. And again, this is one area where our leaders try to tell you the half-truth. They'll tell you, again, you people are complaining about the economy, but look at the exchange rate. It has been at 129. It almost never moves over the last 1 year. And despite all the global events happening, Trump being elected, tariffs, it's been at 129. So one could argue the positive side is, it's been stable, so it's easier for businesses to plan. But unfortunately, when a currency now becomes, it's not operating in the open economy, it means now your currency starts getting overvalued. When a currency starts getting overvalued, it means now your goods become more expensive compared to other parts of the world. So if there was somebody sitting in London or New York and they want to do a holiday in Kenya or a holiday in South Africa, they'd be like, okay, my $2,000-$3,000, where can I get a good offer? So if your prices are not competitive, start saying your goods are actually overpriced. Your tea, your coffee, and those are our key exports. So as a country that wants to be a key exporter, we need to make sure that we're also competitive. Yes, it's good to have stability, but when your exchange rate now starts not reflecting the realities, now you'll find even foreign investors saying, okay, we like Kenyan tea, but we think it's a bit overpriced. We like Kenyan holidays, but we think they're a bit overpriced comparing. And that's why China is always trying to devalue its currency so that it's always the cheapest place to do everything. And that's why America has a very big problem with many countries around the world. It is countries are manipulating exchange rates to get an advantage. So if you want to be a net exporter, you always want your currency to be competitive so that your flowers, your tea, your coffee, people will say, yeah, we like the value. But if people start saying it's a bit overvalued, we can get coffee from Brazil, we can get, then it means even your exports will start getting hurt. In the next slide, in terms of growth, as I said, we saw a major slowdown last year, where economic growth for at least the third quarter came down to 4%. And that was actually the slowest economic growth since COVID. And obviously, it was on the back of the high interest rate. When you have a high interest rate environment, it means people are not doing a lot of economic activity. It means the growth is actually quite subdued. So we are waiting for the latest numbers, but we hope that with interest rates coming down this year, we can see a bit of that vibrancy returning into the economy. So hopefully we can start picking up. But that means the banks have to play their fair share of reducing interest rates so that Kenyans can start having money in their pockets and doing more activity. So it's 4%, but again, people keep asking, Ken, even that 4%, sometimes we still don't feel it. That 5%, we don't feel it in our pockets. And again, it's also tied to the structure of our economy, where there's a lot of focus on public sector growth. So investments in roads and bridges and infrastructure, which is good because we do need infrastructure, but you'll still find a lot of the companies doing the big public infrastructure projects are foreign. So when they are paid, money is repatriated to the home country. So if it's the Chinese doing the SGR and they are paid, they repatriate money to China. If it's the French maybe doing the Maurironi Summit way, again, it will repatriate it. So that's why I'm very keen on private sector, because most Kenyans are in the private sector. Your hotels, your supermarkets, these are the areas we want to see money circulating a lot. Again, we have the issue of capital-intensive sectors versus labor-intensive sectors. You'll find telco doing very well, Safaricom's doing very well, but those are very capital-intensive sectors. They don't employ a lot of people. Where we need investment is in the labor-intensive sectors, such as agriculture, tourism. These are the areas where a lot of people are. Even a small injection in agriculture, you'll feel it lifts the standards of living, because almost everybody is tied to agriculture or tourism. So again, it's making sure it's not just about money coming to the economy, but money going to the right spaces of the Kenyan economy, because the spaces where Kenyans are, and if you target those areas, you can see an instant improvement in the lives of Kenyans, as opposed to some areas where it'll be more on paper, but people will still be complaining they're not feeling benefits. You know, there was that transaction by the Nigerian bank, Access Bank, coming to buy a National Bank of Kenya. And that has been in the headlines. The biggest bank in Nigeria, Access Bank, buying National Bank of Kenya. And there are two sides to it. One, you could say this is good foreign investment coming into Kenya, coming to support our economy. That's one angle to look at it. But for me, I was a bit sad, because National Bank of Kenya is a public bank. This is a bank that was for the government, formed in 1968. And public banks are very critical to an economy. We have our economy has about 40 banks. Most of them are private banks. We only have about 2 or 3 public banks, and National Bank was one of them. And for me, I keep saying public banks are very important, because they can do things that private banks cannot do. Public banks are meant to be for the government to use it for economic transformation. So if the government is pushing the bottom up, it should be the public banks pushing it. So personally, I was not quite happy to see the sale of that bank, because this is the bank that should be funding agriculture. Most banks do not want to touch agriculture. They say it's risky, it's dependent on rain, on weather, too many risks. So public banks can take risks because they are backed by the public purse. And for me, the sale of a public asset such as National Bank, for me, was a bit disappointing because those are the banks. If you think of banks like AFC, Agricultural Finance Corporation, AFC was very big many years ago. Nowadays you don't hear about it, but AFC is what got a lot of farmers working. It gave them a lot of farmers working capital. People bought land and property through the Agricultural Finance Corporation. Nowadays it's a shell of itself, and we hope these are the entities that can be revived to be able to really hit those sectors of the economy that a normal bank cannot touch on. In the next slide, again, the growth sectors, people keep asking, which sectors are growing in the economy? Where should I invest my money? Again, services. Kenya has been a services economy. You'll see things like food and accommodation doing very well. I think that's the fastest growing sector of the economy, food and accommodation. These are hotels, investments in Airbnb, in hotels. Services tend to do very well. ICT does very well. If you look at transport and sector doing very well. So Kenya is a very service-driven economy, which has positives and negatives. Every society, most societies have three phases of growth. Many societies go from an agriculture phase into an industrialization phase, then into a services phase. For Kenya, it's almost as if we went from an agriculture economy, almost skipped the industrial phase, we went straight into services. So we've almost had a missing gap. Yes, you could say in the 80s, in the 90s, we saw a lot of industries coming up. We saw the Rivertex coming up. We saw companies in Thika. In fact, they used to call Thika the Birmingham, of Kenya. But that industrialization was very thin. We just skipped into the service economy. And the challenge of having a service economy that is not producing is now you end up having a challenge, because what will you be serving if you're not producing? You have to, service has to be based on some production. So even when you talk about, we used to have a very nice textile. Actually, our biggest exports to America are apparel, clothes that goes to big brands, the Levi's, the Wranglers in America. And people keep asking, if we are selling high quality jeans, high quality apparels to America, why is it that Kenya is the biggest mitumba market? In Africa, actually Kenya is number one. It has even overtaken Nigeria, which has 4.5 times its population. Why can't we create a textile industry for ourselves? And that is the big problem. We are not investing in production. So we need to have industries, policies that foster production, policies that foster production in terms of creating industries that can create high, meaningful jobs for our people. So yes, it's good. Services, if you want to invest your money, definitely the services sectors will grow. But as an economist, we get worried when we don't see enough production. We want to see industries. We want to see, that person taking pineapples, making pineapple juice, selling to schools. That is where really, I think that's the area that has been lacking, that production phase. So we pray that we go back to a bit of production. Moving on, I already talked about the monetary policy. They have reduced interest rates. We can see the governor, Kamau Thuge, really keen on banks lowering interest rates, because part of the reason we are not producing enough, it's not we don't have entrepreneurs, we do. But they say, yes, I want to start a juice making platform. And they'll be like, okay, let me go to the bank. But the bank is giving you 20% loan on your interest. Of course, you'll go home and say, no. So part of industrialization means reducing the cost of interest rates so that the entrepreneur can be entrepreneurial. Moving on. That really is a sign of the credit to private sector. Part of the reason interest rates were so low, it shows now the credit to the private sector had actually started contracting. It means people were no longer going to banks to borrow money, and that's a sign of lack of economic activity. So that's the reason the governor has been trying to push for lower interest rates. Moving on. Fiscal policy, there will be a lot over the next 2 months on fiscal policy with the Finance Bill 2025 coming up. I think the bill should be coming out next week. Gen Zs are getting ready. And a lot of people keep asking, will it be, how many Gen Zs are here? I met one this morning, but they keep emailing me, telling me they're ready for Finance Bill 2024. And the leaders are saying we've learned lessons from last year. Last year was a bad year. We don't want to go back that way. We are going to avoid taxes that are on sensitive things for individuals. Maybe we made a mistake. Maybe we were putting things on bread, things that on sanitary towels. Maybe we went too far last year, and we want to do it again. That's the message they are giving me. So we are waiting to see how the bill looks like this year. Hopefully it will be more progressive, but already I'm hearing some rumors that they might increase VAT. So I pray. Somebody was telling me they want to increase VAT from 16 to 18%. So we are praying they listen to the voice of reason. And because last year was anybody who was caught up in those Gen Z, I was caught up on June 25th last year in the CBD, and it was very, very scary experience. It's not something I'd want anybody to go through. So we are hoping there'll be a more dialogue on the finance bill and how those taxes will be touched on in the next slide. Next slide. I'm still worried that, again, if you look at the budget policy statement, which is a document that comes ahead of the finance bill, again, you're saying the country is still borrowing more. They keep saying, when you are in a hole, stop digging. But again, if you look at the numbers, we're still borrowing quite a bit. Our revenue is not growing as fast as our expenditure. So that means we are still borrowing. And if the government keeps borrowing, it means interest rates will go up. So that's a big problem. So we are hoping, as the document comes out next week, we'll study it and we'll be able to give our recommendations. But so far, I've not seen a clear thing that tells us they have changing course. I'm still expecting business as usual in terms of the approach. Maybe they'll have more civic engagements, but the fundamental structure, I'm still not quite sure if it has changed. Next. Some of the big bills that have been passed, we've seen the Tax Amendment Act. So basically last year when they weren't able to pass the finance bill, they still needed to raise revenue. So in December, they passed something called the Tax Amendment Act to be able to recover some of the money they would have raised the finance bill. There was a business laws amendment. But there's that last one, which I think people should be quite cognizant with. It's not talked about a lot, but I think it's something that will be of significance, and that's the National Rating Bill 2022, looking at the property rates you are paying and really moving us from the land rates you are paying to property taxes. That's the direction we are going. So you might see a lot more focus on you paying property taxes moving forward, revising the land rates that we've been paying. And I think that is an area people now need to be really alive to. I think now there's a realization that maybe VAT is too emotive. When you put VAT on this personal product, on baby formula, on Netflix, on these things, it has a way of creating a lot of negative emotion. So the big thinking now is targeting things like property, land, property taxes. So you might see quite a bit of activity, particularly in Nairobi, where the land valuation roll has been updated. Most other counties, the land valuation roll is still quite old. It's still going back to the 80s. But in Nairobi, it's been updated. So Land rates have already started coming up, and I think that's the area the government will be targeting more. So people in real estate, I'm sure our colleague is quite familiar with some of the dynamics happening in that space, but I think that's a place to really watch. Next, in terms of business conditions and sentiments, the CBK has its own survey. It says firms are reporting optimism. But if you look at in the next slide, you have the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce. For me, I prefer that. It's more of an independent survey, and it talks about businesses really struggling because of high cost of doing business and having to lay off people. So a lot will be depending on that. And the next slide really is what are the emerging risks and challenges? And this will be my last slide. Again, as I said, at the global level, there's a lot happening in America. I'm still optimistic that America will emerge from this policy confusion. I know they'll emerge, but there's a lot of uncertainty. So people don't like investing when there's a lot of uncertainty. Obviously, the USAID cuts. Again, I think people have not fully appreciated what those USAID cuts. I've been talking to my contacts in the donor space, and they're saying, wow, there's a lot there. People are trying to pivot. People are trying to look for new things. So I think for me, it's the real risk, even more than tariffs. For me, tariffs might not be big, but I think the USAID cuts is something that the government has to really be aware of. Of course, the monetary policy, banks playing their role in reducing interest rates. Then, of course, is a heightened Gen Z activity in line with the finance bill and the political environment. Sometimes visitors come to Kenya and they say, wow, is elections this year? Or is it next month? The heightened political tension. I think those could be the risks. But again, Kenya remains still a land of opportunity. We have a very young median age. Our median age in this country is 19 years. And that's the reason brands want to come to Kenya, because they know young people want to consume, and that's a good thing. If you look at Europe, their median age is in the 40s, so those are aging societies. So Africa, Kenya is still good. Our infrastructure in Kenya is quite good. People who've traveled across Africa, they come to Kenya and they say, wow, you guys have done a good job. I have a friend who's come from Ghana, and they say Ghana is where Kenya was in the 90s. So we still have good infrastructure. We have our human capital is really one of the best. The quality of our people, we may not have gold and oil and diamond, but the quality of our human people are doing good work, not just in Kenya, in Qatar, in America. In fact, our diaspora remittances have hit $5 billion. So that's money coming. So there's still a lot to in terms of opportunity, but definitely the risks are alive, and this is a time to really try and maximize the opportunities, minimize the risk. Somebody was asking me, this US-China trade deal, what are the opportunities, what are the risks for a Kenyan here at Windsor? What are these? And I said, from an opportunity perspective, both countries will start looking for new markets. If China blocks out America, America will start looking for new markets in Africa. China will start looking for new markets in Africa. So you'll find goods that you would never have found before, now landing within your doorstep. And if you think of one of the big phones out there, I think it's called the Google Pixel. There's no distributor in Kenya. If you see somebody here with a Google Pixel, they must have bought it from outside of the country. So you can imagine if now Google says, we'll sell Google Pixel in Kenya. That means, you could be a distributor, and you could position yourself to be a distributor and make good money. That's an opportunity. A risk means, if you're in Athi River and you are in the EPZ exporting to America, maybe the tariff might affect your company, and maybe your company might say, we are not selling as much because of the tariffs, so we are scaling down operations, and you might need to be let go. So there are both risks and opportunities, so it's time for people to see where they are sitting, to see how do I maximize the new opportunities in this new economic order, and how do I minimize the risks. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. This has been a wonderful session.